Hello everyone, good morning, and welcome back to the StarCityGames.com Season 1 Invitational Weekend here in Roanoke, Virginia. It is time for yet another pregame show, everybody, because we had a little over 500 players come out here to play in this fantastic tournament. Someone's walking out of here with $20,000, their likeness on a card, an invite to the Pro Tour, all that good stuff. We've only got 8 players left. So we got to figure out who that last player is going to be, who's going to walk out of here with a big old smile and in the sideboard with Nick Miller for their winner's interview. And that's exactly what this pregame show is for. I'm going to introduce my comrades. Of course, I'm Cedric Phillips. I think you guys know that. Craig Krempels will be joining us this morning. Craig, are you ready to watch Lantern dominate this morning?
Oh, this is great.
You excited for Lantern?
Yeah, this is gregreat.
Okay, fair enough. Most people aren't excited for Lantern, but apparently Craig is. Matthias Hunt, are you excited for Lantern?
I'm excited for untimed Lantern. You didn't, you know, you only need to mill about 5 cards during the game, and we might see just that.
Ooh, that would be wonderful. I can't wait for that. And we go down to Ryan Overturf, who's always got a big smile. I know you're waiting for Lantern.
I am at peak excitement, Cedric.
Good. Well, we're all ready to roll this morning then. We've got our breakfast in. We've got some Lantern to talk about here in just a moment. But for those of you who missed the top 8 players, you want to get an idea of what's in the top 8 and who's in the top 8, we can take a look at our bracket right now, and we can see who has made it this far. Your number 1 overall seed is James Woolmacher. He's playing Abzan. Now, this is not the general Abzan that you think of. We're talking Bitter Blossoms. We're talking Voice of Resurgence. We're talking a deck that's geared to beat mostly Grixis Shadow, and he felt that his deck could do just that, and that's why he's number 1 overall seed right now. He'll be going against Brian Koval, who is playing a mono-white Death and Taxes. This is not Legacy, this is Modern, and this is Death and Taxes here. So that'll be a match that we're going to break down here in just a bit. We've got Frank Scarin, who is playing Burn. There's not a lot to say about that. He's going to try to bolt you a bunch. Against Michael Chinese, who's playing Eldrazi Tron. Michael, one of 2 players with Eldrazi Tron in the top 8 here this morning. As we take a look at the right side of the bracket, you'll find our other 4 players. We mentioned Lantern Control. That's in the hands of Magic newcomer Adrian Sullivan. Just learning the game, so that's good to see. His first big tournament, he's going to be going against Daniel Fournier, who's playing Grixis Death Shadow. He's one of 2, and the other one playing Grixis Death Shadow is Todd Anderson. Very, again, accomplished Magic player in a top 8. I think this is his 7th invitational top 8. Excuse me, 4th, 5th, 6th. He never loses, so I don't know. He literally never loses. And then he'll be going against Daniel Byington, who is also playing Eldrazi Tron. So, get you an idea of our top 8 players and the decks. And now here in the pregame show, we're going to break it down. We're going to make some picks for who we think is going to win each match. And then, of course, we're going to pick who we think is going to win the tournament here from Roanoke, Virginia. So, we are going to start with Magic newcomer Adrian Sullivan.
Okay.
And his very quick and not boring Lantern Control deck. This sounds like a lot of fun to me. I'm sure it sounds like a lot of fun to you. He's on your left. Daniel Fournier is on your right. He's playing Grixis Death Shadow, arguably the best deck in Modern. We finally got someone in the top 8 here. We did not have that take place at Grand Prix Las Vegas, but we've got 2 in the top 8 here. Daniel, the first player we'll be talking about playing that deck. I'm going to start with Adrian's side of things, and Craig, I'm going to start with you. Adrian went 8-0 in Modern. And then, you know, he kind of found his footing in the second part of Standard. That's why he's in the top 8 today.
Yep.
But his Modern record really carried him there. He's one of the only players playing Lantern this weekend, and he dominated, obviously, going undefeated. How do you feel his selection is, and how do you think his matchup is against Daniel, who's clearly playing a very good deck?
Well, to me, this matchup, probably the whole day, the whole weekend for Adrian has boiled down to Ensnaring Bridge.
Sure.
You know, he's in a room full of creature decks of all sorts of variants. He just needs to get Ensnaring Bridge on the board. We've also often seen him play super careful, get a second Ensnaring Bridge on the board. You know, he's never in a rush. He doesn't make any silly mistakes. Doesn't try to close out the game too quick. Just get the Ensnaring Bridge on the board, protect that card, and ride it to victory.
In this particular matchup, Matthias, this one's going to be built a lot around Ensnaring Bridge. You've got Tasker, Gurmag Angler, Death Shadow all to contend with, so a quick bridge is going to be very, very important. He's got to be worried about Stubborn Denial, Kolaghan's Command, things of that nature. Do you think he's in a favorable spot here?
I think it's, I don't know if entirely would say favorable. I'd say he's got a shot here. You want to look at the number of cards that Grixis Death Shadow can use to interact with Ensnaring Bridge. And you mentioned when it's on the that it was on the table, they have Kolaghan's Command, they have Stubborn Denial when it's on the stack. You also have to remember that Grixis Death Shadow is a deck with 7 1-mana discard spells. Yep. So it's not that Adrian has to get a quick bridge. He has to kind of find it off the top of the deck real quickly. I could see that being a problem in some of the early games.
Now, this Lantern deck, Ryan, is one that can find the tools it's looking for with Ancient Stirring, Straw Steps, Inventor's Fair, Academy Ruins, things like that. It's surprisingly resilient, and it's also really strange, but it finds ways to win. We know the Death Shadow is kind of the best deck in the format, but I would imagine that if Adrian went 8-0 through Modern, he probably played against Death Shadow at least once.
Yeah, and I've played the matchup twice, which is about 6 hours of experience. So I have something to speak to. Kolaghan's Command is really the best card out of the Shadow deck. You can find it at any point. If you look at Fournier's deck list, though, he didn't register that card this weekend. So that's going to be a big hiccup for him. He has a lot of interaction, your discard spells, your stubborn denials, but that's more easy for Adrian to circumvent. He has discard spells of his own. So this might be a rough bout.
Now what makes this interesting, when you're playing Lantern Control, that's a deck where you have to have a very deep understanding of what every other deck is trying to do, so you know what cards you have to cut off. Know what cards you have to Codex, Shredder, mill away. Sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice your Lantern, all that good stuff. Matthias, we're working with very good information here, and as you were so kind to mention, we're working with untimed rounds. Yeah. So it's not going to be too much of a rush for Adrian.
So you're going to actually see some different gameplay out of Adrian Sullivan this weekend. A lot of times what you'll see a Lantern player do is when they start to assemble a lock, they'll, as a concession to time, they'll say once they have 3 Codex Shredders in play, they'll just mill 1 every turn, because, and then, you know, leave the backup 2 in case they see a card they have to mill. In untimed rounds, what actually is interesting, the Lantern player rarely mills any cards. They make a checklist in the head of about 5 to 7 cards they have to mill, and they don't mill anything else. And Adrian Sullivan is veteran enough to know this, and I expect him to play this way today as well.
I think that's going to be what's kind of make this a little bit interesting, Craig, is he's got an idea now of exactly what cards he's going to care about from Daniel, from future opponents, all that stuff. But if I turn on the other side of things, because we put so much onus on Adrian and what his matchup looks like, how can Daniel win? What does he need to do to get the job done?
Well, we've talked about how good this Grixis Death Shadow deck is. It just has all the pieces. We've mentioned the discard, the cheap creatures, the counter spells. It sifts through its deck very quickly. So if Adrian Sullivan just can't find that, you know, that ensnaring bridge right away, if it gets stripped out of his hand with an early discard spell, or if the opponent can just sit on a stubborn denial, he could be in a lot of trouble. The clock is very quick coming out of these Death Shadow decks.
One of the things that we know about Death Shadow is it is very quick, like you mentioned. They can play Death Shadow as soon as turn 2, depending on how the draw goes. We know they can play Tasigur and Gurmag Angler on turn 2, and that can slide under the bridge, and then all of a sudden they've got a stubborn denial for the bridge, and then life's pretty good for them, Matthias.
Yeah, and one more thing I do want to talk about this, with a veteran player like Adrian Sullivan, he is going to, more than anyone else, do his work and be prepared here. There was this thing I saw yesterday after the top 8 was announced. Adrian Sullivan, along with Eric Hawkins, they had sat at a table. They had all 7 competitors' deck lists spread out. Adrian was sitting there with highlighters, literally highlighting every relevant card out of all 7 decks and memorizing them for the top 8 today.
Well, I kid about Adrian being a newcomer to the game, 40 years old, been playing Magic basically since the game has started. And that's why, as we get ready for our pick'ems here, I'm going to go with him to win. Look, my thought process is basically like this. First of all, he wouldn't play this deck in a tournament of this nature if he didn't know what he was doing. He's been playing Lantern for a long time. A lot of the people in Madison have. I know that Sam Black played it for a little while as well. So it's a deck that's kind of around that area. And it just would be hard for me to believe that he has not played against Death Shadow either at this tournament or testing in Madison or online, whatever, and he doesn't know what to do. Now that he's got the deck list in front of him, I think this is a tough road for Daniel to get through. Craig, for you?
Yeah, I'm on board with you. I think the matchup's just going to line up well for Adrian. He's like you said, he's the veteran player. He's got all the experience in the world. We never see him make just a silly mistake. So the untimed rounds definitely favor him as well. Just we're going to see a lot of careful play and some really interesting Magic here.
Matthias, how do you feel?
Well, look, we spent a lot of time talking about Lantern control, and rightfully so. Adrian's 8-0 with the deck and a great player. But the part of this equation I think we haven't talked about is that Daniel Fournier is no slouch of a player on his own for the Toronto-based player. He has really been up and coming in the last year, and we have a good player playing the best deck here. I'm going to pick Daniel to win the match.
Yeah, I don't want to sell Daniel short here, Ryan. You know, in Modern, he played Grixis Death Shadow. In Standard, he played Mardu Vehicles. So he played 2 very, very good decks, very, very well. That's why he's in the top 8. I just think this is going to be a little bit too much for him to overcome. How do you feel?
Yeah, I did end up picking Fournier. A little bit of an asterisk there. I did not look for Kolaghan's Command. I made an assumption that it was there.
Sure.
The absence of that is significant. There's a lot of powerful interaction in his deck, though. It's probably a very close matchup, and Fournier, he is going to be on the draw, which is a little bit awkward, but he does have a lot of tools that are necessary. I do like Grixis Shadow in general in this matchup, so I did pick Fournier.
It's best of 5. We can't forget that. Nick is going to go with Adrian Sullivan, so it's 3-2 in favor of Adrian. That means we think as a collective that Lantern Control will get the job done over Death Shadow. So that's our first matchup we'll take a look at. Now we're going to move forward to our second one, and that's going to be Daniel Byington, a name that we are less familiar with, playing Eldrazi Tron here this weekend. Eldrazi Tron, obviously a very powerful deck. We saw Todd Stevens get the job done with that deck in Charlotte just a couple weeks ago, Craig. You and I did commentate that show. The deck is very powerful when it gets going. It has some interaction, enough interaction, but this matchup in particular against Grixis Death Shadow in the hands of Todd Anderson is very, very, very close always. I think that's what makes this matchup very, very interesting. Both these decks are good, both these decks are powerful, both these decks can do broken things. It's kind of like they're just throwing haymakers at each other, and we're going to see who kind of stands up at the end of the whole thing. For you, and I know we've covered this match quite a bit actually over the past month, it's a hard match to pick.
It is super close between these two decks. The Eldrazi Tron deck, definitely the more powerful of the two decks,
okay.
But the Death Shadow deck has the consistency, and it has just more card selection. It has different answers to different things, so it's more versatile. We've been calling it the best deck in the format for a reason. So yeah, this is a difficult matchup to look at and just be decisive picking one person.
It is very difficult. We've watched Andrew Jessup against Todd Stevens. That matchup was close. We've seen versus videos with Brad and Todd Stevens where that matchup is very close. We've seen no-name players in the feature match area where the matchup is still very close. Matthias, is there something that leans one way or the other for you in this matchup between Daniel and Todd?
Well, this has actually turned out to be a pretty tough top 8 for the Eldrazi Tron players. You look at decks like Lantern Control, when we get to the other side of the bracket, it's not going to get any better for the Death and Taxes players. But for the Eldrazi Tron players. But the Eldrazi Tron did put 2 copies into the top 8. This deck, as you mentioned, it does cheat on mana. It gets to play larger threats early, and against 3-colored decks that have a variable game plan, that can be really powerful. So I do think there's a lot to like in its Grixis Shadow matchup.
Ryan, how do you feel about this matchup? Obviously, Todd, a veteran player, Daniel more of the unknown here, and we know what Todd is capable of, and Todd is a best deck kind of guy. That said, your deck can be great. You can be a best deck kind of guy. You can get beaten over the head by Thought Not Seers and Reality Smashers.
Yeah, that's one thing about the Eldrazi Tron deck. You play the cards you're dealt. You have lands, you have spells, you cast them in the order that you have the mana available to cast them. It's kind of workshop decks, stacks decks, they work in every format. Get some fast mana, cast some big spells. In my experience playing this matchup, it doesn't really matter who's sitting across the table, it matters what's on the top of their deck.
Sure.
And every time I play Grixis Shadow against Eldrazi Tron, it's a good card. And there's a lot of them.
That's true. That's true. I can't argue with that. And again, the thing that's interesting about this matchup, right? Todd is going to be the one who's got all the decisions to make, I would say, with the thought scouring and the serum visioning and how to sequence his threats and all this stuff. And Daniel's just going to say, all right, this, and either Todd's going to have answers or he's not. I don't know what side of that I would want to be on, Matthias, personally. Sometimes you want to be on the skill side. Other times you just want to say, oh, I drew another insane card, and you just win.
I think when I used to be playing a lot of events, I would really have been drawn to the Death Shadow side of this. But right now, especially, in the booth sometimes, I would say give me Eldrazi Tron in this matchup. It's powerful, and if my deck's going to do some of the work for me, great, I'll take it.
And this is what that deck, and I think you've put it very well, sometimes this deck is just going to do some of the work for you, Craig. Todd can lose this matchup, and I want to be pretty clear about this. Not saying that Daniel can't make a mistake with his deck. He can miss sequences, threats, so on and so forth. Sure. But in regards to sequencing and playing your cards in the right order, it kind of falls on Todd. Now, fortunately for Todd, he's very good, so he might be very comfortable with that. But if you are in this situation, what side would you want to be on? Do you want to be the one who's got to make all the decisions, and if you screw up, you might lose?
Well, it's funny. You make that sound almost like a disadvantage.
Sure.
The ability to make several different plays each turn and have different lines that you take throughout the game is a big advantage. I would want the ability to make more decisions in a lot of matchups. This particular matchup, it's scary when you're sitting on the Death and Taxes side because some of the cards, even the cheap cards, are so good against you. Turn 2 Chalice of the Void can just end the game by itself. Yep. We're looking at the main deck Relic of Progenitus, which is a big problem sometimes. And then they've got the fatties that back up these cards. So your general question, I would usually like to be able to make more decisions throughout the game. In this particular matchup, I'd probably want to be on the Eldrazi Tron side of things.
That makes things interesting as we go to our predictions here, who we think is going to win this match. If I were if I were one of these two players, I would want to be on the Eldrazi Tron side of things if I'm playing the match. But if I have to pick a winner, I'm going to pick the person who has the most SCG Tour Open top 8s. I'm going to pick Todd Anderson because it's very hard for me to pick against Todd Anderson in situations like this. If he lost this match, I would not be surprised. I also want to note he's on the draw, which makes things a little more difficult for him as well. And he can just get haymakered out of the game. But he might be the most skilled player in our top 8. I know he's the best SCG Tour player in our top 8, and that makes it very, very difficult for me to pick against him in this spot. Craig, where do you go?
I agree. It's super difficult to pick against Todd. He's in his hometown. He's playing great Magic. But I think Todd Stevens has shown everyone the way to go in this matchup.
Okay.
You know, he's put in so much time figuring out the right way to sideboard, the right main deck cards, that everyone else that plays this deck now is benefiting from that. I'm picking Daniel. It's super close. It's not an easy pick.
I think that's a good thing that you mentioned there too, is that Todd Stevens, he more or less figured it out. You and I did that show in Charlotte where he was basically talking. We were in the booth, obviously, but a lot of what was coming from the floor to us is, hey, I figured out a sideboard plan.
Yep.
I figured out to go to Hanging Back Walkers, board out Karn. He's figured out a strategy, and these deck lists that we see, Matthias, reflect that. Who's your pick here?
Well, I want to go back to Death Shadow. That's been really the top deck here in Modern for a while. One thing that we've seen happen this weekend, and I guess over the last month, is players have really built it to become more of a slower deck and a fair deck. You're seeing the Teamer Battle Rages get traded for Snapcaster Mages, and this all makes sense, especially as decks are gunning for Shadow. You want more options. The problem is the more you become a 3-color Grixis deck, the more I don't want to play against colorless spells. And I think it's just the tipping point's too far. I'm going to go for Daniel.
Mr. Overturf, we haven't heard from you for a while. Talk to us.
Yeah, I also like Byington in this matchup, and being on the play is actually a very significant advantage. Eldrazi Tron is a deck that there's not a lot of hate cards for, and the hate cards that you do have, Ceremonious Rejection, can be quite bad on the draw. The reason being Cavern of Souls. You want to counter Thought-Knot Seer, you can't. Frequently your best target is Expedition Map on turn 1. On the draw, that's dead. I do like Eldrazi Tron on the play.
Let's see what Nick Miller has gone with. He's going to go with Todd Anderson as well. So we've got a 3-2.
I just couldn't make up my mind.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
Apparently not. So let's go 2.5, 2.5.
All right.
Because Matthias is a little unsure of himself. He wanted Todd earlier. Now that we've talked to you a little bit. Now
you sold me.
Now you're going back to the Eldrazi Tron side of things. So who knows where Matthias stands on that one. But as we prepare to cover our next 2 matches, we've got Abzan versus Death and Taxes and Burn versus Eldrazi Tron. We're going to take a short break here from Roanoke. When we do come back, we're going to break down our #1 overall seed, James Woolmacher, and his Abzan deck that has Voice of Resurgence and, yes, a Bitter Blossom in just a bit.
On September 1st through the 3rd, make plans to be part of Magic the Gathering history when StarCityGames.com proudly presents Grand Prix Washington, D.C. Register by Sunday, August 6th for the standard format main event to compete for thousands of dollars in prizes and receive an exclusive playmat featuring Hour of Devastation. Select the 3-day Infinite Challenge package to compete in all challenge events for one low price, while also walking away with the exclusive Hour of Devastation playmat. All Friday challenges are also Grand Prix trials. Come out early and compete for buys in the main event and more chances to claim an Hour of Devastation playmat. Prefer 100-card formats? Register for the Ultimate Commander package to play in 4 Commander on-demand events and take home a Commander vs. playmat and Ultimate Guard Boulder deck case. Want to play on Magic's grandest stage? Compete in the Pro Tour qualifier on Sunday and receive a Progenitus foil promo just for playing, plus the chance for an invitation to Pro Tour rivals of Ixalan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And don't forget to come say hello to Grand Prix Washington, D.C.'s many special guests, including cosplayer Christine Sprankle and an artist alley full of fan favorites, headlined by guest of honor Rob Alexander. Be part of Magic the Gathering history. Register for Grand Prix Washington, D.C. today.
Hello everyone, welcome back. StarCityGames.com Season 1 Invitational Weekend here in Roanoke, Virginia. You're watching our pregame show. Cedric Phillips, Craig Krempels, Matthias Hunt, Ryan Overturf down there on the end. As we have already broken down 2 matches, if you're just joining us, we took a look at Adrian Sullivan and Daniel Fournier. That's Lantern Control against Grixis Shadow. And then Daniel Byington playing Eldrazi Tron and Todd Anderson playing Grixis Shadow. Grixis Shadow happens to be on one side of the bracket. And on the other, I'm sure you predicted, Abzan versus Death and Taxes. Why wouldn't you? James Woolmacher, our #1 overall seed, with a very unique take on Abzan. And sometimes unique can be making fun of someone, but I actually think this is a very smart take on the deck, all things considered. His take on this deck, he has Bitter Blossom, he has Voice of Resurgence, he has Knight of the Reliquary, Lingering Souls, obviously, but a lot of people when they play Abzan, you know, you've seen Abzan Traverse builds from Jading Clomparents and Chad Castell on the SCG Tour. You've seen Grim Flayers, Dark Confidants, all that stuff. But Bitter Blossom is a very, very good card right now, especially if Death Shadow is your #1 deck. So to see James at the top and have a good Modern record, truth be told, not all that surprising. On the other side of things, I am a little surprised. Brian Colville's 2 deck choices this weekend, Death and Taxes in Modern and Metalwork Grixis Colossus in Standard. I don't really have words.
Yeah, covered all those in our pregame show.
Yeah, those were our 2 picks, those 2 decks. But Brian is here, and he's certainly going to try to make the most of it. Matthias, I'm going to start with you, because I want to put you in a terrible spot. You have to start with this matchup.
All right.
How do you even approach this? I don't even know where to go.
Wow. All right. So on the Death and Taxes side, this is actually similar to the Legacy deck, except you don't get any lands that do anything nice. You just get a stack of planes.
Sure.
So instead of the, I guess, like, Violent Things and Disruption plan, you're actually really trying to get value out of your creatures here. And you're going to see that in his list. 4 copies of Restoration Angel, and he's really counting on those to make strong plays with his cards like Blade Splicer. Viling and Flicker Wisp will do a similar thing. I think where it's going to be scary for him is that these cards just all by themselves are, you know, 1 mana too much when you compare their power level with what an Abzan deck is going to do.
Power level feels a little low. Like
3-1 for 3 versus Lingering Souls, like, that's not a matchup I want to be on the 3-1 side.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to make things tough here for Brian, truth be told, Brian, because I think this is another instance where I think both players were gunning for a certain deck, which was Death Shadow.
Yeah.
Because again, everyone kind of knows coming into this room, just like they did at Grand Prix Las Vegas, that look, the best players are going to play Death Shadow. And that happened in Vegas, that happened here. And we've got 2 players with Death Shadow who are very good, in Daniel Fournier and Todd Anderson, in the top 8 with it. But they're on the other side of the bracket. And I imagine Brian Colville wasn't expecting to play against Bitter Blossom this weekend. So, you know, Flicker Wisp looks pretty bad. Restoration doesn't look particularly good. Is this going to be kind of an easy one for James?
By my estimation, it is. One thing about the Death and Taxes deck in Modern, it almost feels disingenuous to give it the same name as the Legacy deck.
Sure.
The Legacy deck is super good at beating up those 3-color removal-heavy decks in Legacy because you have Wasteland. They've even started playing Ghost Quarter now, but it's better in Legacy because people don't play any basic lands, whereas James has 4 basic lands, I believe, so the Ghost Quarters are a lot worse. You have to, like, set up a combo with Leonin Arbiter. I can't tell you how many games I've won against Modern Death and Taxes by casting 3 removal spells, and the game was just over. Abzan is an abundance of those. I think it's going to be a rough go.
I think this is going to be a rough go as well here for Brian. Craig, is there anything that stands out to you that he can do here against James? There's removal, there's Bitter Blossom, there's a lot for him to work through.
I think you guys are kind of overestimating some of the problems here. This Death and Taxes deck it's quietly better than people give it credit for. Okay. We're kind of knocking all of these creatures. This creature's not great, that creature's not great. This is one of those decks that the whole is much better than the sum of the parts.
Okay.
You know, Matthias said the lands are just lands. I completely disagree with that assessment. If you've ever been locked under a lead in an Arbiter and they just go after you with their 4 tech edges and their 4 Ghost Quarters, you know, they start sacrificing their Horizon Canopies to draw extra cards. All of their lands do things. And a big card that no one has mentioned yet is Mirran Crusader.
Sure.
That card can be a nightmare for a lot of decks.
It's very good against Bitter Blossom, quite obviously because of the text of the card. I think that we might be underselling the Death and Taxes deck a little bit. It's kind of like the Legacy version, honestly, where you take a look at the deck list and what people can do in Legacy, and you're just like, what do you?
Yeah.
I don't get it. But Death and Taxes continues to win there, and maybe it will continue to win here. That said, I'm picking James because I just think that Bitter Blossom and the power level of his deck is just higher than what Brian is doing. Could be wrong, but James has also been playing some very good Magic. He's #1 overall seed. He's going to be on the play. Who do you select?
I'm going with Brian here. I'm going with the Death and Taxes deck. I expect a very interesting matchup. This would be a great one to watch because, you know, it's a little more unusual. The decks aren't what we normally see day to day, and there's going to be a slugfest with a lot of creatures on each side.
Matthias, we go to you.
All right, so with Death and Taxes, I think you're right that this is a deck that has been quietly good, and we should keep it on our radar. I still feel like it's a couple good white creatures away from being a really tier 1 deck here, you know, and we might see those in a couple sets down the line. I'm not sold on Blade Splicer. In particular, with James's deck, what I really like about it is he's on a 3 Noble Hierarch build of Abzan, and the ability to actually him reach his 3s as fast as the Aether Vial deck, I'm going to give it to the Abzan.
Yeah, it does give him a little boost with those, of course, Knight of the Reliquaries. Ryan, who do you select?
I selected James. To speak to Craig's point about Mirran Crusader, there's actually only 2 Crusaders in the Death and Taxes deck, and we actually have a heavy Path to Exile build of Abzan here. You've seen a lot of lists cutting that to play more Fatal Push. This is a 4-2 split for Path to Exile. That's going to be very relevant.
We take a look at Nick Miller's pick. We'll see where he goes. He goes to James as well. So Craig, you're on your own island there.
Yeah, I'm just out on a limb.
I wish you the best of luck, but your history of picking people is very good here on the SCG Tour. Last but certainly not least, it'll be one of the matches that we do cover. It's going to be Frank Scarron, who has changed his life and has changed his ability to play Magic. Now, he's a 2-time Grand Prix champion, so he's always been good at the game, but he stepped away a little bit to get some things in order, and he is back in a big way. He is playing Burn, recommended by former world champion Seth Manfield. Pretty tough to shoot down that recommendation. And it's going to be going against Michael Strunice, who's playing Eldrazi Tron as well. Now, Craig, I'm going to come to you because we started yesterday with coverage of Frank.
Yep.
Excuse me. And you guys may not have been here for this, but Frank was playing Burn.
Yep.
He got paired against Scred Red.
Right.
So that's a bye.
Right, we saw that one.
Yeah, didn't get close to losing at any point. And I don't want to call this a bye because the power level of Eldrazi Tron is pretty high, but I think that Eldrazi Tron doesn't want to play against Burn. How do you feel about this, Craig?
That was my initial feeling, but we've watched this matchup a couple of times over the last month and a half, and it's kind of surprising how this Eldrazi Tron deck can stay in games. You know, they get these fatties down on the board ahead of schedule. You know, if they're lucky enough to get a turn 2 Thought Not Seer, turn 3 Reality Smasher, like the Burn deck can't race that.
Yep.
That's actually just too good for the Burn deck. And the 4 Chalice of the Void, huge in a matchup like this.
Chalice of the Void, very good. Frank does have Destructive Revelries. It's best of 5. He knows that card's going to be coming in. And when you are best of 5, you know, even though Burn isn't maybe the most skill-intensive deck, it does have a pretty deep sideboard. Frank's got some 3s and 2s, a couple singletons as well in his sideboard, Matthias. But there is the power level of Eldrazi Tron that you always have to contend with, as Craig did mention. So how do you analyze this one?
Well, so I think it's not in Chalice of the Void that I'm as worried about, because you mentioned the Destructive Revelries. Remember, Frank's the 4 seed. So to play out of Chalice, I'm really worried about from the Burn side. It's a Chalice for on 1 on turn 2 on the play. Now, Frank's on the play game 1, so this could happen at most once and just catch him unaware. The card I'm actually really concerned about on Frank's side is the card Thought Not Seer. Any sort of Thoughtseize effect is just fantastic against Burn, and that 4th point of toughness means it's not ever leaving. I think a quick Thought Not Seer out of Strunice's deck, followed by a Reality Smasher, that can definitely race Burn.
Burn, not the sexiest deck in the world, Ryan, you know that. It's pretty straightforward, but it is pretty well positioned right now. You're not going to find a lot of hate cards for that in this tournament. That's why I think Frank did so well. You know, not a lot of life gains, Sun Droplets, whatever hate card you want to play against Burn right now. Not a ton of an Eldrazi Tron, but Chalice is good in multiple places. So in theory, Michael does have a hate card. How do you see this matchup?
So being on the draw is very significant when you talk about Chalice of the Void. Again, this is modern. There aren't any lands that make that faster. There's no soul lands. You can't cast Chalice on turn 1. That's a huge downside. Thought Not Seer, particularly if you draw 2 temples, cast that on turn 2, that's a heck of a haymaker. That one's going to be tough to beat, but you're drawing to that specific spell and those specific lands. That's a huge ask. I like Burn a lot.
Yeah, I think If Michael's able to put that combination together with consistency, that will lead to wins. If he's able to go Temple, Thought Knot, I think he's going to win a high percentage of the time. I don't want to say he has to have that, but I do think that Temple needs to be a part of his draws a lot. Him just going Tron piece, I played Tron long enough, even though it's not Eldrazi Tron, but I played old Tron long enough to know that that was not fast enough. Sometimes the turn 3 Wormcoil engine on the draw was not fast enough.
Yeah.
So that could be a concern here.
Yeah, well, especially with the Haymakers that Eldrazi Tron plays, they're even less impactful in this matchup.
Yeah, so that's a slight concern. That's why I'm going to go with Frank for my pick. Being on the play is a really, really big deal for him, so he doesn't have to worry about Chalice all that much. There's no way I picked Mike. I did pick Michael.
What is going on here?
These graphics are messed up. I got tricked. They're not messed up. I picked Michael, and then you guys convinced me into burn. I'm picking Frank. If we can change that, we will. But I'm picking Frank. Go ahead.
Audible.
Delete the tape. Greg, your turn. Who'd you pick? Do you remember?
I actually picked Mike.
Okay.
And I'm sticking with Mike.
Okay, bold.
You know, I think you guys are overestimating the burn deck's ability to just run like clockwork on time every game, every single time. It doesn't always line up perfectly for them.
Feels that way.
The Eidolon of the Great Revel is not spectacular in this matchup.
That's true.
You know, sometimes they just draw 1 or 2 lands in a row, and that opens the door. And like I said, these Eldrazi Tron decks are here for a reason. They're in the top 8 for a reason. They have a lot of play.
Bias to you?
Well, the first 3 times I've picked the opposite side as Craig, so I think I'm just going to make it a full 4 for
Beautiful. You guys are at war here in the booth.
I think one of the things I like is that Frank has the die roll on game 1. And we talked about some of the things with Chalice of the Void. This is going to be a race of a matchup. The die roll matters. And even outside of the die roll, I like burn by a small amount.
Ryan, to you?
So like Craig said, Eldrazi Tron is in the top 8, or burn is in the top 8 for a reason. Eldrazi Tron's in the top 8 for a reason. The reason that Eldrazi Tron is in the top 8 is because the other good decks have largely pushed burn out of the metagame. I think this is a matchup that he really doesn't want. I like Frank here.
All right, let's make sure we got that right. 2-2. Nick,
3-1.
separate
3-1
us.
or 2-2?
I'm not sure. Nick, he's got Frank. I'm on the ropes. I'm not sure who I want here. I know what it says, but I'm not sure who I want. But it looks like we are siding with Frank on this one. And now we have to pick winners. Now look, I know who I picked. This is not changing. I'm locking it in. I'm going with the old man. I'm going with Adrian Sullivan to win this tournament. 8-0 through Modern with Lantern. Look, if his deck is good against Grixis Shadow, he might go against that twice. And I'm pretty sure he's fine against Eldrazi Tron. Chalice is obviously good against them, but he's got Abrupt Thinking, he's got Seal Primordium in his 75. And then, you know, whatever happens on the other side of the bracket happens. He can't control that. But I like his side of the bracket. I like his ability to play the deck. And I like the fact that most people do not have hate for him. So I'm going to go with Adrian as the champion. And he'll probably make some Stang token or some old token that no one's ever heard before because he's been playing Magic longer than Richard Garfield. Craig, to you.
This is funny. If you had asked me this, you know, 2 months ago, I never ever would have picked an Eldrazi Tron deck to win almost any event.
Okay.
But we've watched it enough on camera. We've seen these decks just find ways to win games over and over. I picked just the highest seeded Eldrazi Tron player.
Okay.
So that's where I'm going.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look. You've got Brian, number 2 overall seed. Fair enough. Matthias, let's see if you can get your pick right. If you remember.
All right. Well, certainly can't pick Daniel then. No, I actually picking. So I think this player's been very, very strong for a long time. You mentioned he won 2 Grand Prix earlier. One thing we forget is that Frank Scarron took about a year break from Magic here, and if you look at his results and then take the break out of it, he's just been very dominant for a long time. I think he may be one of our strongest, the strongest player here in the top 8. He's been working with a great team this season. I think this is his big finish. I'll pick Frank Scarron.
Burn on the top, perhaps, this weekend in Roanoke. Ryan, to you.
So I selected the highest seeded Eldrazi Tron player, though my methodology was perhaps slightly more sophisticated than Craig's. This was based on the quarterfinal matches shaping up the way that I expect them to. If Adrian Sullivan actually defeats Grixis Shadow, I think that's a really hard matchup for Eldrazi Tron. So if Adrian loses, I expect Daniel Byington at the top of the standings.
Daniel Byington, 2 for 2. I know Nick Miller is with me. That's the only thing I can get right up here. I know Nick is with me. He likes Adrian Sullivan as well. He likes a Lantern winner, and if Adrian does win, we're going to be here all night. We're going to be here a long time. The Berglund Center might close down before he gets done ringing the bell and the opponent finally taps out, but we will find out soon enough. here from Roanoke, Virginia. We're going to take a short break. We're going to get set up, and we're going to have a quarterfinal match to bring to you. Craig and I will start things. Matthias and Ryan will take care of our second quarterfinals. Then we'll do a first semifinals, so Craig and I will take care of. Matthias and Ryan will take care of the second semifinals, and then we'll have a finals where someone's walking out here with $20,000, a bunch of SCG points, their likeness on a card, and an invitation to the Pro Tour. So we'll see you guys back here for all of that from Roanoke just a bit.